George Bush held a news conference or a press conference, and that conference was held several weeks after the invasion on Iraq. And some people had put up a banner in front of which he was going to speak, and it said, "Mission accomplished." And he was later asked how he felt about that. And he said that he regretted standing in front of that banner and speaking that day because he knew that the mission had not been accomplished. And so he regretted it. And I think each one of us can relate to that. We all have those regrets because sometimes we send the wrong messages. We can say what we want to say, but sometimes we don't put it in the right words. Maybe we're not clear enough. Maybe we're not precise enough on what we're saying. Maybe we actually misdirect intentionally. But communication is that way. And we communicate with our body and with our voices. And all of those languages communicate something. And oftentimes we can send the wrong message. You know, Jesus died on the cross. And when he was hanging on that cross, they had done all these awful things to him. And he's hanging on that cross. And his final words were, "It is finished." And that message, especially if you read the Greek, is very clear. There is no question about what Jesus is saying, because he says, "It is completed. I have done everything you required of me to do, God." And yet today, people will say, Jesus failed. He failed in his mission. He shouldn't have died on that cross. And there are people that said it in Jesus' day. The apostles thought, "Oh no, what's going on?" They were with him in the garden when he was arrested. They watched him be taken to the cross and crucified. And they said, "Oh, I guess this just didn't work out." And they went back to fishing and back to doing whatever they want to do. And people today do the same thing. And the reason they're doing it is they receive the message wrong. You see, we can send a message wrong, and we can also receive it wrong. And how we receive it wrong is because we've got certain ideas or certain concepts or certain things that the way we think things should be. And when they don't fit in that mold, then we're not wrong. The other thing's wrong. And we have to somehow take that and make it fit into our mold. And people do that on a daily basis. And people pay for that and have regrets on a daily basis because that's what they do. Instead of analyzing and thinking, how can I see this differently than I'm looking at it, we say, no, it's got to fit into my mold of thinking. Well, that's very true. We do that. And I can prove it to you that the apostles weren't above that. In our text today, Peter has just confessed Jesus as the Christ. And it says, starting in verse 31 of Mark chapter 8, it says, "And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again." Imagine knowing you're going to be killed. Knowing, I have people tell me, "I wish I just knew when I was going to die." No, you don't. You really don't want to know that, because it'll mess up your life the way we do things. But Jesus knew that he was going to die. In fact, in John chapter 10 and verse 17, if you turn there with me, Jesus makes this proclamation about his life. John chapter 10 and verse 17, he says, "For this reason the Father loves me, because I laid down my life that I may take it up again." He knew what he was doing. He knew that he was going to die. In John 3 and verse 14, he said, just as Moses raised the serpent up in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. He knew how he was going to die. And in John chapter 12 and verse 27 and 28, he says, now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name. And then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. And so Jesus knew what death, that he was going to die, and how he was going to die. And that'd be a little bit tough for us to handle, I think. Because I watched a movie about this lady that she was going to die. And so she wanted to do everything she wanted to do yet in this world before she left this world. Can you imagine if Jesus had that focus? Instead, he stayed the course that God wanted him to stay, knowing he was going to die. But more than that, he knew his killers. Think about this. He walked amongst his killers. He spoke to his killers, knowing they were going to kill him. The elders, the scribes, the Pharisees, who all ganged up together when they had a common enemy and crucified Jesus. It was them. But he knew who was going to kill him. You know, we wouldn't be able to handle that very well. I know a young fellow that murdered a fellow, and they asked the young fellow, they said, why did you murder him? He was your friend. And the young fellow was a little mixed up. And he said, I know that he was going to kill me. And so I got him before he got me. Now, that is probably the way we would handle knowing who our killers are. Or we try to avoid them, or we would try to get as far away from them as we could. That would be the way we would handle it. But Jesus spoke right to their faces, and he challenged them like they had never been challenged before. Can you imagine doing that and knowing that these people were going to kill you? Imagine walking in the shoes of Jesus. What would you do? But Jesus did all of that because he knew one other thing. He knew his reward. In John chapter 7, he talks about the reward that he was looking toward. It is important for you and I to keep that same focus. I'm going to tell you right up front here. But Jesus did that because of this. John chapter 7, verse 28. So Jesus proclaimed, as he taught in the temple, you know me, and you know where I come from, but I have not come of my own accord. He who sent me is true, and him you do not know. So Jesus knew where he came from, and in chapter 8 and verse 14 he says, even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I came from and where I am going. But you do not know where I come from or where I am going. Jesus knew not only where he came from, but he knew where he was returning to. And that's why Jesus could push on with all of what he did. Because he was going to be back with the Father. He knew all of those things. I don't think that you and I could probably handle knowing when we were going to die and how we were going to die. I don't think we could handle knowing if someone was going to kill us, or if it was going to be a car wreck or a house fire or a whatever. We couldn't handle any of that. But I am convinced that if we truly know our reward, as Jesus knew his reward, then by that power we could handle it. And that's how Jesus handled it. And so he's teaching his apostles. He says, I'm going to be handed over. Mark chapter 8. I better get back to Mark chapter 8, because that's where I'm reading from. And he says, I'm going to suffer many things and be rejected and all of these things, and they're going to kill me. But I'll rise again. And Peter, the apostle who often put his foot in his mouth, he didn't like to hear that very much. Now you need to understand Peter. Peter and the rest of the apostles, they had a concept of who Jesus was. I mean, he just confessed him as Christ, right? So he knew who he was, but he still didn't know what his purpose was. And so he gets a little bit upset here, and he takes Jesus aside and rebukes Jesus. Now think about this. That is the equivalent to you and I saying, hey God, come here a minute. You need to listen to me. I'm going to straighten you out on a couple of things. I mean, we'd be in big trouble, wouldn't we? And Peter got himself in trouble. Because that's what Peter does here. Have you ever had someone argue with you when you know you're right? How do you feel when you know what you know and someone says, no, that's not the way it happened? You want to just take them and shake them and say, what is wrong with you? Right? But no, and so Jesus looks at Peter, and I'm sure he's thinking, what is the matter with you? Right? And he says to Peter, he says, get behind me, Satan. You know, Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. He knew where he came from. He knew what was going to happen to him. He knew where he was going. And he knew what he had to accomplish in his ministry. And here is Peter saying, I'm not going to let you accomplish that. That's in fact what Peter was saying. He didn't know it in that language, but that is what he was saying. And so Jesus defends himself. He says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Now, imagine the look on the rest of the apostles' face. Think about this. Here is Peter. He's just been praised by Jesus because he said that Jesus is the Christ. And Jesus turns around and says, get behind me, Satan. What a topsy-turvy, huh? You see, Peter confessed what he knew, absolutely. But he didn't have the focus that he was supposed to have. You know, Jesus said in Matthew 7 and verse 21, he says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but him who does the will of the Father, that's the one that's going to enter the kingdom of heaven. And you know, we can quote the Bible. I mean, Hitler quoted the Bible. He also worshipped Satan. But he quoted the Bible. So just saying the words, if you don't understand the purpose behind them, is just saying the words. That's it. And that's what Peter was doing at this point. And Jesus says to him, when he says, get behind me, Satan, he says, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Where was Peter's focus? Peter is thinking, Jesus, you know, he's been doing all these wonderful miracles, and he's going to take care of Rome. He's going to take care of everybody. And here are the Jews. They're going to be exalted as the nation on earth. And they are going to have the position of Rome that Rome held at that point. That's what Peter's thinking. Physical kingdom. And Jesus says, you're not focused on the things of God. Did Peter have an excuse? Not really. If you read through the Old Testament, it prophesied about Jesus coming and establish the kingdom and what the kingdom was going to be, and that the Gentiles were going to be involved in everything. And even after Peter is preaching the gospel, he is still opposing the Gentiles to a point. He had a hard time grasping things, at least the purpose of God and the purpose of Jesus. And I think sometimes we have that same trouble. And so we better not beat him up too bad. We better look at ourselves a little bit. But we need to understand God's plan and purpose. Not just Oh, I know he's the Christ. Because anyone could say that. And that doesn't really get you anywhere, because in the next breath he said, "Get behind me, Satan," to the same man. So he wasn't focused. And so then Jesus calls the crowd to him and the apostles, and he says, "Let me explain this to you. I'll make it just a little bit clearer for you. You need to take up your cross daily." He said, you need to take what life you have and live it for God, for me. You need to deny yourself. Now, we say, "Oh yeah, I deny myself." And it's easy to say I deny myself. But do I really deny myself? Or am I sitting there and somehow putting Jesus and God into this mold that I have them to be? Or am I totally denying myself and just looking at him for who he is and worshiping him and living for him? Denying self means I don't have any input in the matter. I don't have the concept. He's got it, and I got to get it from him. That's what he's talking about. So he says you need to deny yourself, and you need to follow me. Well, follow entails this idea of imitating, of walking in the same steps, of mimicking, of doing the same things he does, saying the same things he says. And following has nothing to do with me being out front of him. Following has everything to do with him being out front and me behind. And too often in our lives sometimes, we're the one leading. And when we get in trouble, we look back and we say, "Jesus, aren't you helping me?" And then we wonder why we're in trouble, instead of having him out front. You know, it's that whole shepherding idea. The shepherd led the sheep. He didn't drive the sheep. He led them. The shepherd looked after the sheep, and the sheep followed. And so Jesus says you need to deny yourself. You need to deny anything about yourself, and you need to look to me. You need to take up your life, and you need to follow me. That's what I'm talking about here. And the reason for that is because if you try to save your life here, it's pointless. You're going to lose it anyways. It doesn't matter. You know, really? I mean, to a few people maybe. But if I drop dead right here now, or I drop dead 20 years later from now, it really makes no difference. The only difference is I have that much longer that I better be serving the Lord and walking right with him. That's all. That's the only difference. Now, to my loved ones, maybe it'd be a little bit different. But for some of you, it might be a blessing. I don't know. But there is that this life isn't what it's all about. So if you try to save this, guess what? Good luck. You're going to lose it anyways. For life is so much more life in Christ, because that's the one that goes on eternal. And so it's not about this life. But if you lose this life for Christ's sake, the reward is waiting for you. The reward is there. And that's what we're striving for. That's what kept Jesus going when he knew everything he knew. And he said, because the things of this world are of no profit. Now, I don't know about you, but I've worked for some things in this world, and I got them. And then about a few weeks later, I started wondering why I ever worked for that and why I ever wanted that. Have you ever been there? And you go, why? You know, I could have done something else and spent my time on something else that had been more productive. See, we're all fallible, right? But the things in this world are of very little profit, because they're all perishing. They're not what life's really all about. And so gaining everything in the world. Think about this. Look at Howard Hughes. He died a wretched man. I mean wretched. He died alone. He died paranoid of absolutely everything. And he had more money than anyone else in the world at that time. The 10 wealthiest men, look it up sometime on the internet, how the 10 wealthiest men about 50 years ago, how they died. Anywhere from jumping out of a window of a high, tall building to a paranoia to whatever. They all died wretched deaths. They had amassed all the profits that this world could manage. And they had nothing. And that's what Jesus is saying. There is no profit in this world. The profit is in the life to come. Is in the life that Jesus has to offer us. The life that Jesus wants you and I to have. And he said, oh, one more thing. One more thing you need to remember. If you're ashamed of me, when I come with my angels in glory, I will be ashamed of you. You know, I had a friend in school, and I was a different duck in school. Maybe I'm still a different duck, but he was my friend. But when his other friends were around, he wasn't my friend. He treated me differently. And the reason he did that, I believe, now that I look back on it and see what was going on, he probably felt sorry for me. But he was really ashamed to hang around with me. So when no one else was around, he could hang around with me. But when there were other people around, he was ashamed to hang around with me. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. He says, if you're ashamed of me, and he's not talking about in Sunday morning assembly, it is easy for me to get up here and say, Jesus is Lord. That is easy to say because every one of you agree. But say it out there to someone that might bite your head off for saying that. And stand on that. Then I know you're not ashamed. If you don't confess Jesus before men, he will not confess you before the Father in heaven. Because it's not about going to Jesus and saying, my King. That's easy. The challenge is telling someone else out there of whose king he isn't, saying Jesus is king. And they may respond some way you don't like it. But that's okay, because Jesus said, don't worry about it. You see, it's not just about this life. It's not all about this. It's about life eternal with me in heaven. And so, ashamed will put you in the bracket of not living the Christian life. That's what it's going to do. Except on Sunday mornings. And maybe Bible study Thursday night. And if the preacher comes over to your house another day, maybe for an hour. But otherwise, you're not going to live the Christian life because you're ashamed of Jesus. And you're worried what other people are going to say about you. And what they're going to do to you maybe if you hold Jesus out there. Jesus says, if you're ashamed of me, I don't want anything to do with you. But if you're not ashamed of me, and if you live your life for me, and you even die for my cause, your reward's waiting for you. Life eternal. And that's what we all have. You know, we know things too. We know a similar thing to what Jesus knew. We don't know it as well as he knew it, but we know that there's a reward waiting for us, don't we? We know that there's life eternal waiting for us. We know that he didn't come to erect a physical kingdom and that things here are important. We know he came to give us the spiritual kingdom. And that is very important. That is all important. We know that. And we know this too. Jesus said, you will be, if you walk for me and you live for me and you talk about me to men, if you confess me before men, you will be persecuted. Yes, there are going to be some times where you're going to be persecuted. It's going to hurt a little bit. You're going to be offended. You're going to be chastised. You may be hit. You may be whatever. Jesus said, you know that. So we know some things too. We know all of that, but our desire, our trying to keep this life says, but I don't want that. And Jesus says, there's one other thing you know. If you succumb to the pressures, the consequences aren't good. But if you stay the course, then the consequences is life eternal in heaven. The world says, the Bible's just a good story. It's got some feel-good things in it. It's got some old wives' tales in it. It's outdated, and we know better. And Jesus said, that sounds like Peter talking a little bit, like when Peter told me that I shouldn't be saying what I was saying. Get behind me, Satan, and listen to me. Hear me, he said. You need to deny yourself. You need to take up your cross daily. You need to live for me, and you may die for me. But you will have life eternal. And that is for everyone who will do that. Maybe we should do a little bit better job of listening to Jesus. Not just, I hear you, Jesus, and go do what I want to do, but listen to what Jesus is saying and then do what he tells us to do. And if we're listening, then we won't run into trouble. Peter wasn't listening. Peter heard it, but he had some other thought going on up here that confused the message. Empty it, deny self, and let Jesus speak to you and listen to him. And this morning he gives you that opportunity. If you're not in Christ, if you've not been immersed for the forgiveness of your sins, then you need to come. He's calling for you to come to him, to listen to him. And we pray that you listen as we stand and sing.
I traveled down a lonely road, and no one seemed to care. The burden on my weary back had bowed me to despair. I oft complained to Jesus how folks were treating me, and then I heard him say so tenderly, my feet were also weary upon the Calvary road. The cross became so heavy, I fell beneath the load. Ye faithful, weary pilgrim, the morning I can see. Just lift your cross and follow close to me. I worked so hard for Jesus, I often boast and say, I've sacrificed a lot of things to walk the narrow way. I gave up fame and fortune, I'm worth a lot to thee. And then I hear him gently say to me, I left the throne of glory and counted it but loss. My hands were nailed in anger upon a cruel cross, but now we'll make the journey with your hand safe in mine. So lift your cross and follow close to me. Oh Jesus, if I die upon a foreign field someday, 'twould be no more than love demands, no less could I repay. No greater love hath mortal man than for a friend to die. These are the words he gently spoke to me. If just a cup of water I place within your hand, then just a cup of water is all that I demand. But if by death to living they can I'll take my cross and follow